Episode 1, Room 313. I still remember that night vividly. My first night shift at the old Maplewood Hotel, a historic place tucked away in a small town in Vermont. The hotel had been around for nearly a century, once a stop for traveling merchants, later a quiet retreat for those seeking peace in the countryside. But the locals all shared one strange rule: never stay in room 313. The manager warned me before my shift, lowering his voice as if afraid someone might overhear. That room has a problem. If anyone ever books it, find an excuse to move them somewhere else. Never open 313, not unless I tell you to. I laughed it off. Old hotels always have ghost stories, right? Probably just a gimmick to scare new staff or attract curious guests. That night I worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. Rain drizzled outside, and the wind howled through the cracked window frames. The long hallway on the third floor glowed dimly under yellow lights, the air heavy and cold. Around midnight, as I was checking the logbook, the internal phone rang. The screen showed room 313. I froze. No one had checked into that room. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling. Front desk, Maplewood Hotel speaking. On the other end came a faint, labored breathing, followed by a soft, broken whisper. A woman's voice. Please, don't leave me here anymore. My heart pounded. The phone slipped from my grip. I checked the reservation list again. Room 313 was completely empty. I took a deep breath, grabbed my flashlight, and went upstairs. The door to 313 was slightly open, a pale light flickering inside. Hello? I called out. Is anyone there? No answer. I pushed the door open. It moved easily, like someone had just been inside. The room was covered in dust, sheets wrinkled and untouched. A faint scent of old lavender hung in the air. Then I heard it, the sound of running water from the bathroom. The door was half shut. I nudged it open. The faucet was running, the tub empty. On the fogged mirror, letters slowly appeared as if drawn by an invisible finger. I'm still here. Suddenly the lights went out. The door slammed shut behind me, and in the reflection, a woman in a white dress stood right behind me, her long black hair covering half her face. I spun around. Nothing. But the pillow on the bed sank, as if someone had just sat down. I bolted out of the room, my footsteps echoing through the hall. The door to 313 slammed shut with a deafening thud behind me. The next morning when I told the manager what happened, he just stared at me quietly and said, her name was Evelyn. She stayed in that room back in 1954. She disappeared during a stormy night. They found blood in the bathtub, but her body was never recovered. I shivered, remembering that frail voice over the phone. Please, don't leave me here. And from that night on, every night shift worker at Maplewood swears they've heard the phone from room 313 ring, even though it's been locked for decades. Episode 2, The Voices from the Graveyard Behind the Old Church. The town of Hollow Creek lay hidden deep within the old forests of the American East. There wasn't much to see, just a handful of houses, a quiet river, and an ancient wooden church that had stood for more than 150 years. Behind the church stretched a small graveyard, where generations of townsfolk had been buried under moss-covered stones. Locals whispered that whenever thunder rolled across the sky, you could hear voices calling your name from beneath the ground. I arrived in Hollow Creek one autumn evening, following an invitation from an old priest named Father Morgan. In his letter, he wrote, "Something is happening in the graveyard. I need a witness, someone who doesn't belong here." When I got there, the sky was low and heavy with dark clouds. The wind whistled through rows of tilted gravestones, carrying with it the cold scent of damp earth. Father Morgan led me along the narrow path between the graves, his voice trembling slightly. Every time there's a thunderstorm, I hear someone calling me. At first I thought it was just my mind, but now I'm not so sure. And then, just as he said, when the first thunder cracked through the air, a faint female voice drifted through the wind, whispering softly, "Morgan, Morgan, don't leave me here." A chill ran down my spine. I looked around. No one was there. Only an old gravestone leaning slightly to one side, carved with the name Eleanor Grace, 1892 to 1913. The soil around the grave looked strangely disturbed, as if it had been dug up and hastily refilled. I turned to Father Morgan, but he hesitated before speaking, his eyes distant. Eleanor was my daughter. She died of lung fever over 100 years ago. I blinked, confused. "But Father, that's impossible." He nodded. "I know what you're thinking. I'm not that old, but I am his descendant. Every man in my family has served as priest here, and every one of us has heard her voice before they died." A cold silence hung between us. We went back inside the church, candles flickering weakly in the wind. My eyes caught an old portrait on the wall, a young priest, bearing an uncanny resemblance to Father Morgan. Beneath the frame, the name read, "Father Jonathan Morgan, 1913. "That was my ancestor," Father Morgan whispered, "the man who buried Eleanor." That night, the rain came down hard. I couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the rafters. Then, the whisper returned. Clearer, closer this time. "Morgan, why did you lock the cellar? I'm still down here." I leapt from my bed and followed the sound down to the church basement. The old wooden door was bound shut with rusty chains. I turned to find Father Morgan. He was gone. I shone my flashlight through a gap in the door. The darkness inside was thick. And then, from the corner, a pale hand reached out from behind it, grasping for the wall. I screamed as a lightning bolt struck nearby, illuminating the graveyard through the window. For a single instant, I saw them, dozens of figures standing among the graves, silently facing the church. The next morning, the police arrived. Father Morgan was nowhere to be found, but in the basement, they discovered a small, sealed chamber bricked off long ago. Inside was the skeleton of a young girl in a white dress, still wearing a silver bracelet engraved with the name Eleanor. On the wall above her, written faintly in charcoal, were the words, "I'll wait for you, Father, in the last storm." Episode 3. The House Without Shadows. The town of Grey Ridge was small and forgotten, buried deep in the mountains of Pennsylvania. Among the endless gray pines stood an abandoned house that locals called the House Without Shadows. People said that at sunset, when the light hit the forest just right, the house cast no shadow, and anyone who entered it lost theirs too. It sounded like another small-town legend, until I, Thomas Ray, a reporter for the American Chronicle, decided to see it for myself. I had spent years chasing strange stories across the country. I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. The house stood at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by a sagging wooden fence and ivy that climbed across the roof. The front door was slightly ajar, as if waiting for me. The air was cold enough that my breath turned to mist. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Dust blanketed every surface. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:13, and the cracked mirror above the fireplace reflected the room in warped fragments. When I shined my flashlight toward the floor, I froze. I didn't have a shadow. The beam of light passed through me like I wasn't even there. My stomach turned cold. I stumbled backward, bumping into a framed photograph on the wall. It crashed to the floor, glass shattering. The picture showed a family of 3, a man, a woman, and a little girl. But none of them had shadows. Behind the photo, I found a yellowed note, scribbled in shaky handwriting. Don't stay after sunset. When the light fades, they'll come for what's theirs. I turned to leave and heard the sound of small footsteps upstairs. Soft, careful. A child's steps. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I climbed the staircase. Each wooden plank groaned under my feet. At the top was a narrow hallway and a door left slightly open. I pushed it gently. Inside was a child's room. A small bed, faded wallpaper, and a doll without eyes sitting in the center of the bed. The walls were covered with drawings of people, every single one missing their shadow. Then a girl's voice whispered behind me, cold and distant. "You shouldn't have come here. Your light will fade too." I spun around. No one. But the doll had turned its head toward me. My flashlight flickered, then went out completely. In the darkness, whispers began to rise, dozens of voices overlapping, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They chanted the same phrase over and over. "Give it back. Give it back." I bolted down the stairs, slammed through the door, and ran into the fading daylight. But when I looked down, my shadow was gone. I turned back toward the house. It stood silent among the trees. The setting sun cast long, dark silhouettes across the forest, but the ground around the house remained bare, untouched by shadow. 3 days later, police found me unconscious on the roadside 2 miles from Graywood. I told them everything. They didn't believe me. One old officer walked me out of the station and said quietly, "You're the 7th person to come out of that house alive." None of them ever got their shadow back. Episode 4, The Train to Nowhere. My name is Thomas Ray, a journalist who once investigated the strangest, darkest corners of America. After surviving the house without shadows, I swore I'd never chase the supernatural again. But then I heard about something called the Train to Nowhere. They say that at 3 a.m. sharp, if you stand at the abandoned Everglow station, a place closed since 1972, you can hear the faint whistle of a train echoing through the fog. No one ever sees it arrive, only a dim yellow light glowing in the distance. And then a single door slides open. Those who step inside never return. I went to Everglow Station on a freezing night, the rain falling like ash. The sign was rusted, the clock frozen at 3 a.m. No wind, no sound, just the kind of silence that feels alive. When the minute hand ticked to 3:01, the ground trembled. A golden light shimmered through the mist, growing larger, brighter, until the train emerged. Long, black, endless, exhaling a metallic groan like an ancient creature breathing in its sleep. On the front, a flickering sign read, Route 03, Destination? No. The door opened. Inside glowed a pale yellow light. Empty seats, dust, and a few crumpled tickets scattered across the floor. I stepped in. The door slammed shut behind me. The train began to move. No conductor, no passengers, just me. And faint figures slowly taking form in the seats around me. They looked human, but not alive. Their eyes were hollow, skin translucent, fading in and out like vapor. A whisper brushed my ear. "You're late, Thomas. This train doesn't stop anymore." I spun around. A man in an old suit sat behind me, pale, gray as smoke. "I just want to know where this goes," I stammered. He smiled faintly. "To the place where people go when they don't realize they've already died." The train sped up. Outside the windows, no landscape, no night sky, just a vortex of darkness twisting endlessly. The wheels screamed on the tracks like metal grind. I reached for the brake. Nothing but dust. Then a glowing ticket slid across the floor toward me. The name printed on it made my blood freeze. Passenger Thomas Ray. Status missing. I looked up. Every passenger was now staring straight at me. Dozens of hollow faces, and a chorus of whispers rose around me. "Sit down. The train can't arrive until it's full." I ran toward the front, pounding on the steel door. No response. Outside in the swirling blackness, faces appeared in the void, smiling. Just as the darkness closed in, a blinding white light flashed, and suddenly I was back at Everglow Station, soaked to the bone. The clock on my wrist read 3:02 a.m. No train, no whistle, only a single ticket lying in my hand. It said, "Route 03. See you again tomorrow at 3 a.m. If you still think it's just a story, then tonight, the clock strikes 3. Stand at Everglow Station. If you hear the whistle, don't look back." Episode 5, The Village in the Fog. After surviving the train to nowhere, I, Thomas Ray, tried to leave all things dark and unexplainable behind. I drove north, looking for silence, peace, anything normal. But somewhere along the way I got lost and found myself in a nameless village, hidden deep within a fog-covered valley. The road sign was broken, no phone signal, and yet the village lights were still on. Old wooden houses lined both sides of the road, their dim yellow lights glowing softly through the thick mist. Villagers stood on their porches, smiling as I passed, their voices thin and distant. I asked one of them, "What is this place?" An old woman replied, "We call it Hollow Creek. No one grows old here, and no one ever leaves." I thought she was joking, but when night fell, I realized she wasn't. At 5 a.m., I woke to the sound of a church bell. I looked outside. Everything was happening exactly as it had the day before. The blacksmith struck his hammer 3 times. A little boy ran across the street, dropped an apple, and laughed. The same old woman stood on her porch, smiling, saying the exact same words. "Good morning, stranger." Everything repeated perfectly. When I asked what day it was, everyone answered, "It's Harvest Day, October 12th. I checked my phone. The date was frozen on October 12th, 1987. That night, the fog grew even thicker. I followed the road to a small church at the end of the village, its doors slightly open.
Inside, old photographs hung along the walls. Every face in those pictures belonged to someone I'd seen that day, only younger, smiling, alive. Beneath each photo was a caption, "Deceased, October 12th, 1987. My heart raced. Outside, the church bell rang again. When I turned toward the door, the entire village was standing there, staring at me through the fog. A voice echoed from somewhere unseen. "You shouldn't stay past midnight, Thomas."
When the fog covers everything, the living forget who they are. I ran. The fog wrapped around me like hands pulling me back. I saw faces in the mist, pale, eyeless, smiling. I burst through the edge of the valley, driving until the fog disappeared in my rearview mirror. When I finally looked back, the village was gone. All that remained was a broken wooden sign. "Welcome to Hollow Creek, established 1874. I stopped the car, breath trembling. On the passenger seat, an old calendar page had fallen out of my jacket. The date read, October 12th, 1987. And beneath it, written in shaky handwriting, "Welcome back to us." If you ever lose your way in a valley where the fog never lifts, and you see faint yellow lights flickering through the mist, remember, don't smile back when they smile at you. Because in Hollow Creek, a smile is an invitation for the dead. Episode 6. The Song Beneath the Ashes. I thought that after escaping Hollow Creek, I was finally free from the horrors that had been following me. But a week later, I received a letter. No name, no return address. Inside was a small piece of coal and a yellowed note that read, "They're still singing underground." Beneath it was a set of coordinates, deep in the woods of West Virginia. That place once held the Black Hollow Mine, which collapsed in 1953, trapping more than 60 miners. The mine was never reopened. I arrived on a damp gray afternoon. The forest was silent, no birds, no wind. The remains of the old mine lay buried in the hillside, twisted metal beams, charred wood, and gaping tunnels sealed with rusted gates. When I stepped closer, the wind that passed through the tunnel made a sound like someone sighing. I switched on my flashlight and peered inside. A thin mist crawled through the darkness, carrying with it a faint, melancholy song, distant, broken, and low. Down below, where the sun won't glow. The voice was deep and weary, like it came from a throat full of dust. I moved deeper. The stone walls were black handprints, still fresh and glistening. My flashlight flickered. For a split second, I saw figures standing inside the tunnel, faces covered in soot, their eyes pale and shining in the dark. I shouted, "Who's there?" A gravelly voice echoed back, trembling through the earth. "We're still working." I stumbled backward. Behind me came the clinking of chains, followed by the rhythmic clatter of pickaxes, dozens of them echoing all around. The ground began to tremble. The air reeked of sulfur and smoke. And then the song returned, louder, clearer. "Keep digging, keep singing. The light's still far below." I turned and ran toward the entrance, but the exit was gone. The path had caved in behind me, sealed by smooth black rock. I pounded on it, screaming for help. Then, from the other side, I heard my own voice reply, "Don't leave them, Thomas." I froze, and from the shadows, I saw myself, covered in coal dust, eyes hollow, skin cracked and gray. He stepped closer and whispered, "We've been down here before. You just don't remember." I shook my head. head, refusing to believe it. Then, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying at the edge of the forest. My flashlight snapped in half, my clothes soaked in soot. The police found me after hearing my screams from miles away. They didn't believe my story, but when they searched the mine, they found a new opening that hadn't been there before. And from deep within it, they heard singing. One officer managed to record a few seconds before the signal cut out. In the recording, you can hear dozens of voices singing together, and at the very end, a single male voice whispering, "We're still waiting for you, Thomas." I don't keep a piece of coal anymore. I threw it away. But last night, as I turned on my old radio through the static, I heard that same song again. Down below, where the sun won't glow. Only this time, there was one more voice. Episode 7, The Hotel Number 9. I'm Thomas Ray, and by now, I've grown used to curses, whispers from the dead, and places where time seems to stop. But this story was different. It began when I got a phone call just after midnight. The voice I didn't recognize, calm and mechanical, like a machine reading from a script. "Your room is ready, Mr. Ray. Hotel number 9 is expecting you." I had never made a reservation anywhere, but something inside me told me to go. Hotel number 9 sat on the edge of a small town in Maine, a 3-story building covered in moss, with a dim neon sign that barely flickered. Number 9. Inside, the hallway stretched endlessly, lined with faded red carpet and identical wooden doors. No one was at the front desk, just a small silver bell and an open guest book. I looked down at the ledger. The first name written was mine, Thomas Ray, Room 9. Below it, a trembling line written in what looked like dried blood. "Check in tonight. Check out never." I climbed the stairs. The hallway seemed to stretch further with every step. All the doors were shut tight, except room 9, which stood slightly open, a faint yellow light leaking through the crack. When I pushed it open, a cold gust of air rushed out, carrying the scent of rust and decay. Inside was a small room, a dusty bed, a cracked mirror, a clock frozen at exactly midnight. As I set my bag down, I froze. A woman sat by the window, long black hair, a white dress, her face turned away. I managed to ask, "Who are you?" She didn't answer. She just tilted her head slightly and whispered, "Here. Everyone used to be a guest." On the wall behind her hung dozens of black and white portraits, faces of men, women, children, all with their eyes completely blacked out. When I leaned closer, my blood ran cold. One of the portraits was me. I had never seen that photo before, and then the clock began to tick. Its hands crept forward, slow and deliberate, until it struck 12 times. The door behind me slammed shut. In the cracked mirror, I no longer saw my reflection. Instead, I saw the woman in white, standing right behind me. When I spun around, she was gone. Only the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway outside, slow and heavy. I stepped out and realized the carpet was gone. Now the floor was bare concrete, stained with dark patches that looked like old blood. Every door along the corridor was open just a crack. Inside each room was another version of me, some sleeping, some staring blankly at the wall. Then a distorted voice came over the intercom, deep and calm, repeating like a recording. "Thank you for staying at Hotel Number 9, where every guest stays forever." I ran toward the lobby, but when I pushed open the front door, there was only another hallway, identical to the first. No matter how many turns I took, I always ended up back at room 9, and from the desk below, the small silver bell began to ring on its own. Ding, ding, ding. The next morning, the police found my car parked 2 miles away on an empty road. No signs of a struggle, no trace of me. But on my camera, they found one last photo. A long hallway lined with doors, and me standing at the far end, smiling. On the back of the photo, someone had written in red ink, "Your room has been prepared." So, if you ever find yourself passing through Maine, and you see a small, fading hotel marked number 9, don't stop. Don't even slow down. Because when the clock strikes midnight, room 9 opens by itself, and someone will already be waiting inside. Episode 8, The Field of Shadowless Souls. I am Thomas Ray, a man who has seen things no human should ever witness. After escaping hotel number 9, I swore I'd never step into another cursed place again. But fate has a way of dragging me back. This time, it led me to a small, forgotten town called Dallows End, where no one dares to leave their homes after sunset. The townsfolk whispered that the dead here cast no shadows. And out on the northern plain, a barren expanse they call the Field of Shadowless Souls, the wind carries whispers that sound like the names of the dead. I arrived at dusk. The field stretched endlessly, dry and lifeless. There was no grass, no crops, only hundreds of wooden stakes driven deep into the earth, each one tied with a strip of tattered black cloth fluttering faintly in the still air. No birds, no breeze, just a suffocating silence pressing down on my chest. An old man from the village warned me, if you ever see your shadow disappear, run, because that means your soul has been called. I laughed it off, until I turned around and saw that my shadow was gone. The ground trembled beneath my feet. From far away came a low, unearthly murmur, as if hundreds of voices were whispering at once. I shone my flashlight toward the stakes, and realized those weren't rags. They were shreds of clothing, still clinging to dried, dark stains of blood. Then the wind began to rise. The black strips fluttered wildly, forming a chorus of whispers. And beneath that sound, one voice stood out clearly. "Thomas, come back." I spun around. A man stood a few meters away, pale, empty-eyed, and without a shadow. Etched deep into his chest was a single number, 9. I stumbled back, heart pounding. He smiled, a crooked, skin-tearing grin, and pointed towards something in the distance. A small wooden house, isolated in the middle of the field. I walked toward it, each step heavier than the last, as if invisible hands were clutching at my legs. The house was silent, the door ajar. Inside, the walls were lined with dozens of old mirrors, each cracked, each reflecting nothing, not even me. Only one mirror in the center shivered faintly, as though breathing. When I stepped closer, my breath fogged the cold glass, and another face appeared. It was mine, but hollow-eyed, whispering in perfect sync with my voice. "You've already been here, forever." Every mirror shattered at once, screaming like metal tearing apart. From the fractures, black find yourself driving near Dallows End and you see a barren field lined with wooden stakes, don't go near it. Don't listen to the wind, because that isn't the wind at all. It's the breath of the lost. And once they whisper your name, your shadow will never return.
Episode 9, The House on Ravel Hill. I'm Thomas Ray. After the field of shadowless souls, I thought I'd left everything behind. But one night, while driving through the outskirts of Vermont, I saw an old house perched alone atop a hill, one window faintly glowing, while the entire village below was drowned in darkness. I stopped my car. Something about that light held me still. It wasn't the steady light of electricity. It flickered like firelight, but never moved. On the front door, a rusted sign read, Ravel Hill, for those who remember the past. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and rotting wood. The walls were covered with portraits of strangers, their faces faded away, leaving only their eyes. On a table sat a single oil lamp, burning weakly. When I reached to turn it down, a voice whispered right behind my ear, "Don't. If you put out the light, they'll see you." I spun around. No one, but in the mirror across the room, I saw an old woman standing behind me, her hair silver, skin sagging, eyes hollow and full of ash. She spoke softly, almost tenderly. "This hill used to be a graveyard. We keep the light on, so the dead will forget they once lived." My chest tightened. The house began to tick, slow, rhythmic, like fingernails tapping on wood. One by one, the portraits regained their faces. Then, their eyes opened. A deep, smoky voice filled the room. "Thomas, don't let the light die." I grabbed the lamp. The flame was flickering fast. The darkness crept closer, thick as fog. Figures began to form around me, silent, unmoving. Each time the flame dimmed, but they took one step closer. I fumbled for more oil, hands shaking. The glass bottle slipped and shattered. The light shrank to a dull ember. And then went out. In that blackness, I saw dozens of pale faces emerging from the walls. Eyeless, mouths open in a soundless scream. A freezing hand touched my shoulder. I screamed, reignited the lamp, and everything vanished. The house was gone. I was standing alone on the bare hilltop under the moon. At my feet stood a rotting wooden cross leaning on the ground. Then I saw it. My shadow had split in two. One half turned and walked away. I left Ravel Hill before dawn. As my car descended the hill, the rearview mirror flickered with light. And across the windshield, written in ash, appeared the words, "Never turn off the light, Thomas." I looked back, and on the hilltop, the oil lamp was burning. Only this time, no one was holding it. If you ever find yourself near Ravel Hill and see a lone light glowing in the distance, don't go near it. Don't stare for too long, because someone or something is staring back, waiting for the moment you turn yours on. Episode 10, The Mirror Lake, where reflections never fade. I am Thomas Ray. Weeks after escaping Ravel Hill, I began dreaming of water, black, still, and endless. Each night, I would see my reflection in it, but it wasn't mine anymore. It blinked a second too late, smiled a little too long, and whispered words I couldn't hear. I traced the dream to a real place, Mirror Lake in northern Maine. Locals said no one swam there, not because it was cold, but because the lake remembers everyone who ever looked into it. They said, your reflection might not be yours when you look away. The drive was quiet, too quiet. Mist crawled low across the road, and the trees leaned closer the further I went. When I arrived,
The lake was perfectly still, like a black sheet of glass. No ripples, no wind, just silence heavy enough to drown in. I knelt by the shore and stared down. My reflection stared back and smiled first. I didn't move, but it did. It raised its hand, and the water rippled. Beneath the surface, I saw other faces, pale, wide-eyed, drifting just below the mirror line. Some looked like me, some didn't, but all of them were moving their lips, whispering the same word: stay. Then the air changed. The cold wasn't outside anymore. It was inside me. I turned to leave, but my reflection didn't follow. It stood still, staring upward, as if something behind me had caught its attention. When I dared to look back, there was a figure standing in the fog on the opposite side of the lake. It looked exactly like me. Same coat, same face, same scars. And it was holding a lantern, the same one I'd taken from Ravel Hill. He raised it high, and the flame flared blue. Then my reflection in the lake walked out of the water, step by step. I ran. Branches slashed across my arms. My breath burned, but I could hear footsteps behind me. Wet, dragging, steady. When I looked over my shoulder, the other me was running too, but his face was empty, like it had been carved out of wax. I reached the car, slammed the door, started the engine, and in the rearview mirror, my reflection wasn't mine anymore. It smiled, slow and wide, and whispered through the glass, "You shouldn't have looked." The mirror cracked. When I woke, it was morning. The car was parked by a different lake, miles away. The water was calm. When I leaned forward, I noticed something that froze my blood. In the reflection, the lake behind me was empty. No trees, no sky, no me. Only the faint outline of a hand reaching up from below the surface. They say at Mirror Lake, every reflection you've ever made still exists. Each version of you, trapped beneath the surface, waiting for your last look. And when you finally do, one of them might take your place. If you ever find a lake so still you can see every detail of your face, don't look too long, because the reflection might decide it likes being you more than you do.